Good day and welcome to this polar monitoring tutorial. Today I'm going to take you through adding alerts to the devices that you have on your platform. Starting from the home screen, we're going to select devices, and today we're going to go through setting up a temperature alert or a minimum value alert on our Weinberg server room. So I'm going to click on the dashboard there to go to the specific device. We can see that now some of the temperatures have loaded on the device, and here are my two tiles that I'm going to look at. We are going to set the room temperature threshold, and we're going to make it do a minimum value alert at 5 degrees. This tutorial will take us through correctly setting up the alerts so that we obviously don't trigger them too often, so that when clients and obviously yourselves, when you do get the alerts, that they are important and that you need to action them. Once on the live page, we're going to first try and tackle the actual polling rates of these data tiles. The reason we need to look at the polling rates is because if we want our alerts to trigger quickly, or if we want to trigger slowly, we'll set up polling rates accordingly so that they can get the data they need to obviously send the triggers. So I'm going to start by going into the edit settings section, and I'm going to come and edit on my on my data tile. From here, I'm going to go to polling. And I can see that we are currently polling this data tile at 5-minute intervals. So this is essentially how quickly the platform reads, or how often the platform reads the data from the device in the field, and how often it stores it into our database. If an alert is required to be quite sensitive, we need to make sure that this poll rate is quite low, because obviously if say for interest's sake we make this 60 minutes, the database will only be updating every 60 minutes, which means we can only get information to trigger the alert every 60 minutes. Alright, so for this alert now, I wanted to trigger within the next 15 minutes of it going out of temperature. So I'm going to choose 5-minute intervals to then make that read as often into the database as possible, so that I can trigger a more sensitive alert. Right, with that set, I'm going to go back to the live page, and again we can see our information here. Next, I'm going to click on the alerts page, and this will now open up my alerts page. Starting off with just seeing what's on this page, we've got our add alerts and the current alerts that we have added. We can see we currently have a high temperature alert and a gateway offline alert. And on the right hand side here, we've got a list of all the triggers that have happened in the lifespan of this unit. So this one's obviously had some high temperatures. Starting from the left, if there's a tick, it's resolved. If there's a triangle, it means that it's currently still an active alert or a triggered alert. Next, we've got our name column. This is, you will give it a name. We'll show you that just now. Next one on the list in the columns here is the start date. This is when the alert was triggered. The next one is when the alert was resolved. And finally, the duration is how long the alert was triggered for before it was resolved. Okay, what's also nice here is that we've got a download detailed history section, which when you click this, it'll download a CSV that you can obviously dig deeper into the alerts that were triggered over the duration. So, starting off, we're going to click on Add New Alert. Right, this will bring up the alerts, and I will start the procedure by selecting the type of alert I want to add. So, for this demonstration, I'm going to add a low temperature alert. Say I don't want the temperature to go below 5 degrees in this example. So I will then set a min alert. Starting off with the alert name, I want to just keep a default as a min value, or I can change this to low temperature. Okay. Next on the list here is the alert description. What this description does for us is that when the alert does trigger, it can give you a little bit more information. So I can say here, so I can essentially say here, temperature lower than 5 degrees. All right, now that we've got that information, we can come in to our next section here, where we're going to select the key for the alert that we want to trigger on. Now remember, the key here is essentially the same as the data tile in the front section. So we're going to tick on this list, and we'll see here's my 2 room temperature and cabinet temperatures. So I'm going to select room temperature to watch, and essentially this is just the reading that's being watched by the system. Okay. Next on the list, and why it's important to set your thresholds, set your poll rates. Next on the list, and why it's important to set your poll rates according to how often you want to check the alert, is this check every section. Okay, this check every means how often the alert that's running in the platform is going to run. So if I say every 15 minutes, this means that every 15 minutes the Polar Portal or the Polar Cloud will then check. The check every here gives us an idea of how often the platform or the Polar Cloud is going to check for the temperature reading. Okay, so not to be confused obviously with the poll rate on the unit. This is more, it's going to check the database to see when the alert, if the alert thresholds are met, and do that. If I say wanted to read this or trigger an alert at say after a day, then I wouldn't really need to poll the device as often as this. I could, but we wouldn't necessarily need to, because obviously I just want to make sure that I get enough readings that my trigger is obviously warranted. All right, so this is how often the system or the Polar Cloud will actually pull that reading from the device in the field and store it in the cloud. All right, so once I've changed that, I'll click save, and that will then save that document, and we'll take it forward from there. Right, so now we've got our poll rates here. I'm going to now jump into the alerts tab. Now that we've set our poll rate, I'm going to jump into the alerts tab here at the top. Okay, starting from the screen now, we can see a bunch of information. On the left hand side, we've got our alert and notification settings. This comprises of adding the new alerts button, some alert and notification stuff, and then here we can see our actual alerts that are currently set up on this device. So you can see I currently have a high temperature alert and a gateway offline alert. We'll explain these. Basically, the high temperature alert, if it goes above a certain threshold or a certain temperature, it'll then trigger. And the gateway offline alert means that if the Polar gateway in the field now goes offline for X amount of time, it can then send you an alert to say that the device has gone offline. Right, so to add an alert, obviously we're going to click add, but the last thing I want to discuss with you guys is just on the right hand side here. This is basically the latest alerts triggered, or a list of alerts that have triggered over the duration of this device. So we can see these are all high temperature alerts, but basically we have a name, we've got a start date when the alert was actually triggered, we've got an end date, which is obviously when the alert was restored, and a duration, which is how often or how long the alert was triggered for before the threshold was then restored. So with this we can see when exactly the alert was triggered, when it was actually resolved, and how long we were in that fault state for. Alright, so let's jump into adding this alert. To start, I'm going to click on the add alert button. This now gives me a list of things here to fill in. We're going to start from the top and just select the alert type. So as I mentioned, we've got a gateway offline alert, we've got a max type level alert, which you'll use for obviously high temperatures in this case, or high thresholds, and we've got a min value alert, which obviously we use for low temperatures or low thresholds on other devices. So I'm going to select the min value alert, and that'll start with the increasing this table, or this form as we call it, and now we can actually give this alert a name. So let's say low temperature as the name, and then the next part here is the description. So this is when the alert does trigger, it'll give a bit of a description as to what's going on. So in this sense, I'm going to make it temperature below 5 degrees. Alright, let's just give that a nice capital letter there. Okay, so this is now when it sends a message, it'll then tell the client or tell yourself on your email, on your SMS, that the temperature is below the 5 degrees. Alright. Next step, we're going to now click on the data key. So the data key corresponds to the data tile that was on the front page or the live page. And we can click on here now, and you'll see that everything listed in the live page is now listed in the data key section. So as we discussed, I want to do room temperature. So I'm going to select that as my data key. Okay, so as you'll see, as we're clicking through things, so our form is growing and giving us more things to deal with. The next one on the list here is the check every. So this check every now is how often the alert is going to run. All right, what that means is that I can select here and I can choose 5, 15, 30 minutes, an hour. And what this is how often this alert will check if the threshold is met. Okay, so in this case, I wanted it to run every 15 minutes because every 15 minutes or so, I wanted to check if my temperature is wrong. Okay, so I'll choose 15 minutes there. And it's important to note here now that if I had a high poll rate, so say a 60-minute or a 30-minute poll rate, you wouldn't be able to choose 5 minutes out of this list because we can't check for readings that aren't there. Okay, so if your threshold is too high, you won't be able to select different thresholds here or different check everys because, yeah, as I said before, we can't really look for values that aren't there. All right, so as the 15-minute reading now, I'm obviously going to get 3 full readings before my check every goes, so I know that at least if I do get a reading, it's then, or if the threshold does get met, I know that there's 3 readings now telling me that that threshold is met, which then gives me a good condition to trigger the alert rather than sending a false alert and crying wolf. Next on the list here now, we've got aggregation type. So aggregation type is quite important, and we can use these for different kind of scenarios. All right. Starting at the top here, we've got 3 different types of aggregation types. The first one is average, which means that the average alert or the average reading needs to be below this threshold because we have a min value. So if my check every is 15 minutes, I know that I have 3 readings now. So my average of those 3 readings needs to be below my threshold, which I'm going to make 5 degrees. Okay. The next one, which is all, means that all those readings need to be below 5 degrees before the alert will trigger. So that's really nice for temperature style alerts because sometimes you can hit a defrost cycle in a fridge or a freezer that might spike the temperatures. So we can make sure that then we use an all so that that spike is then going to be ignored. Okay, so if I was going to use a high temperature alert here now, and the fridge went into defrost and it defrosted for 5 minutes, out of my 3 readings, 1 reading would be high, and now because 2 of them are below the threshold, the alert wouldn't trigger because it needs all 3 readings to be higher than the value. The last one is the live read. So this one now no longer uses the database. Okay, this one actually sends a reading out to actually live look at the device in the field. Okay, so this is really good for your digital input or constant highs or low type alerts. What we found is that if you use them in cases where you have a varying threshold, so say a tank level or something like that, and you use what a live read, what can end up happening is that the tank level might sit on a 30% reading and it'll go then drift from 30 to 31 back to 30, sometimes to 29, back up to 30. And every time it does that, the live reading will then trigger because it doesn't have any hysteresis to deal with the varying readings. Okay, so generally you'll use average or all, and the idea here is that you don't want to ever trigger false readings. Okay, so with setting this up now, we're going to go through this and make sure that you never get to a case that you're triggering a false reading, and that at least you know that if the alert does trigger, you're going to have a real reason to go and action that alert that's been triggered. The next section of this is the execute action when triggered. This I will reserve for another video, but essentially you can trigger an output or a command button on the Polar devices based on when this alert triggers. It's almost like an if statement. If the alert triggers, then do this. Okay. The next section is the customized alert text. So this is nice for your SMS and email type alerts, or for your less tech savvy user that doesn't want to get a long-winded message. All right. So generally, when these alerts trigger, it'll send the alert name and the alert description, and obviously the alert type. So this will come through to your user as a min/less than value alert on their email, which can obviously be long-winded. So we allow our clients to obviously adjust that. Okay, so this alert, if I click on the customized text, it'll override the standard messaging system of the Polar Cloud, and it'll then allow me to type in whatever message I want to type in here. So for interest's sake, I could say room temp low. Okay, much more customized to you. And I can then say again here, room temp back to normal. Okay, so that'll just allow us to then get more meaningful messages through on the system and customize them to your requirements. Okay, then finally, in specific use cases now, we've got the difference between where are we going to run these alerts. So this will be between the cloud, which obviously runs on Polar Cloud, and then the edge. So for those of you that do know, there is obviously the new Polar Monitoring Glacier Edge, which is an edge computing device, and we can actually run these alerts now locally on the device at the site. Okay, so what that means is that we can start setting the poll rates to be very, very low, so we can get near instantaneous alert triggers when you're running them on the edge. But generally, with the nature of cloud computing, we still need to get the data into the database first before we can trigger the alerts. So your cloud alerts are generally not as instantaneous as, say, your edge alerts would be, or alerts that are happening at the device themselves. So when I say not instant, I mean we're talking down to like 5 minutes here now. But on the edge computing, you can basically get the alerts down to, say, 100 milliseconds or half a second. So they can be triggered a lot quicker. Okay, lastly, we're going to click Create. That'll then tell us that, cool, we've successfully added an alert to the system. And we can see here is our low temperature alert. And once it goes through, or once that threshold is met, it'll then send an alert, and it'll come up on our right-hand side here when it's triggered. That'll then obviously send an alert to our clients. All right. The last part we're going to do is we're going to click on the notifications section. Right, and this is now where anybody that has access to this device, we can actually add to the system. Okay, so these alerts that are running on the alerts page, right, we can see that obviously this gateway offline alert is not enabled, so that you can just tick these to enable those. Now that we've got our low temperature alert added, we're going to go to the next phase and actually add the notification section to this. All right, so I've got my minimum value alert. If I wanted to disable the alert, I could just tick the box, that'll disable it. But let's go to the notification section and add the users that we want to obviously receive this alert. Okay, in this sense now, I want to enable this person to now get an alert that will enable them to get the alert. All right, on the Polar Cloud, we support push notifications, email, and SMS alerts. Okay, and if I want them to get those notifications, I will just tick push, email, and SMS. So this will now allow them to get all three of those alerts. If they all of a sudden don't want to receive alerts, I can just tick them there, and that'll remove them from receiving the alerts by SMS. And I can have as many people on here as I would like to receive all the alerts that we need to get. Lastly, in order for the people to get these alerts, they will need to be verified on the Polar Cloud. All right. In order to verify your account, when you log into the system, it'll ask you to verify your details with one-time PINs. This is based on SMS, so it'll SMS you a one-time PIN to make sure that your contact details are correct. And likewise with the email, it'll email you to make sure that your email address is correct based with a one-time PIN. If the client or the person that you're trying to enable on alerts is not verified, this tick box will not be available and it'll be showing up in red. Okay, and then we'll know that we need to go and verify that account before we can actually send them the alerts. All right, and that wraps up the adding of alerts and getting notifications out to users on the Polar Cloud. Thanks for watching.